This is a follow-up meeting from the one that we had in July in Dalkey. The meetings are run by Dalkey Community Council and Killiney Bay Community Council. We're both community groups who feel very strongly that that the public deserves to know more about the proposed marine developments offshore. At the moment, the press is very pro-development, particularly because of the geopolitical situation at the moment, energy stability, etc. So there is great pressure now to develop offshore wind farms. However, as we explained in our previous meeting, we were concerned that this wasn't going in the correct format, certainly not how Europe would like us to develop. Our previous meeting in July is titled "The Winds of Change at Sea," and we had a presentation by Regina Classen, marine biologist with the Irish Wildlife Trust and Fair Seas, when she presented the Fair Seas Assessment, Revitalising Our Seas. The prime objective of our analysis is to initiate a national discussion to focus on the locations of Irish marine protected areas and to accelerate the designation of these MPAs, emphasising the need to protect the offshore areas of our ocean and our coast. Co-speaker Shauna Keaveney followed the presentation, voicing the local community's ecological concerns with the opening question: is there a conflict with offshore wind farm developments and marine protected areas? Members of the government and local representatives who attended this meeting were invited to answer some of the main concerns raised by the participants. These were as follows: there's no legal zoning map that exists to guide offshore wind farm developments. The National Parks and Wildlife Service and An Bord Pleanála are unequipped to deal with offshore developments, and they have been designated to deal with the planning in the future for these developments. Is Ireland developing renewable energy infrastructure in the right way? And there is a vital and long overdue need for the national alignment between marine spatial planning, the implementation of the EU Maritime Spatial Planning Directive, and the designation of marine protected areas. Subsequent to the meeting on the 27th of July, the government approved the development of a general scheme of a bill to provide for MPAs and to work on drafting and enacting the primary MPA legislation. Paul McWalsh is an independent researcher and consultant living in Hamburg in northern Germany. He's also a lecturer and researcher at Leuphana University in Germany. He trained as a geographer and spatial planner in Maynooth and UCD and has extensive expertise in the fields of regional development, spatial planning and environmental management. He is an international expert on marine spatial planning and has authored numerous scientific papers and policy reports on marine and coastal issues.
This evening, I'm really going to give a short overview of what's in the National Marine Planning Framework and what it means, and what some of the critiques of it are, some of the critical points about it. So it's a critical review. As you can see, we're starting here from Killiney Hill. This is actually somewhere where I went often as a child as well, and was there earlier this year with my family. Yeah, because I spent a few years of my childhood living in Killiney as well, so I am familiar with the area. But of course, marine spatial planning is really about the big picture, and that's what we will focus on in this talk as well. So as you may be aware, a Marine Spatial Planning Directive was introduced in 2014. And what was really key here, I mean, the marine spatial planning wasn't new. A number of countries in Europe already had marine spatial plans for a few years. But what was new here is that there's a common European framework, first of all, that all member states were required to prepare marine spatial plans by last year. And also that an ecosystem-based approach is required as well. And I will say later on more about what that means in practice. So within the Irish context, of course, there have been some key developments very recently with the National Marine Planning Framework, the NMPF, adopted in July 2021, and then the accompanying legislation, of course, in December 2021. And currently in preparation, we have the second offshore renewable energy development plan, so a sectoral plan which sits within the framework of the National Marine Planning Framework. So a key question at the outset is, what do we need marine spatial planning MSP for? What is its purpose? And really, it's about managing different uses of marine space. So these can be offshore wind, shipping, commercial fishing and aquaculture, cultural heritage and tourism, among others. And it's really about the interactions between these different uses, but it's also about marine protection, which I think you heard more about in the previous lecture within this series. So the coherent network of marine protected areas, which is planned in the Irish context, should sit within this framework. And that is what marine spatial planning is also about. A key element is minimizing the impacts on vulnerable ecosystems, and also about restoring coastal and marine ecosystems to a higher level of biodiversity as well, and to enhance their functionality. So the ecosystem-based approach, what does this mean in practice? As I mentioned before, this is a legislative requirement from the EU level. It requires marine spatial plans to contribute to the achievement and maintenance of good environmental status under the Marine Strategy Framework Directive from 2008. This is really important because this linkage is in there between the marine spatial plans and the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. And this is a really key requirement. And it also requires an assessment of the cumulative impacts of all activities taking place within the marine space within the period of the plan. And this is really important as well, that the overall impacts of all of the activities together need to be taken into account, and it is necessary to ensure that they are within the limits then of what is compatible with the achievement and maintenance of good environmental status. So really within the limits of the carrying capacity of the marine ecosystem. It was against this background that I was asked to prepare an evaluation of the National Marine Planning Framework by SWAN, the Sustainable Water Network. And this evaluation was published in May of this year. And the focus here was to test really the alignment of the plan with EU environmental legislation. And in the meantime, also evaluations have taken place by WWF, and also I've been involved in evaluations for BirdLife International as well, for a range of marine spatial plans in Europe. So some of the key messages here. First of all, I argue that the National Marine Planning Framework is in fact not a spatial plan. It is a policy framework. What this means in practice, why do I say this? This is really because it does not show where activities should take place over the plan period. It doesn't give any guidance on this. There's no zoning element. There's no strategic map showing where different activities should take place at sea. So it is not a spatial plan. And the directive is quite explicit that this spatial element is a requirement. There's no clear vision of the public interest in the use and protection of Ireland's marine space. This is, I would say, really a missed opportunity here as well, that the public interest, what is it that we are aiming for in the protection and use of Ireland's marine space? This is not clearly articulated within this strategic document. I also argue in the evaluation that it does not implement an ecosystem-based approach. And this really relates to the aspects above, that it's more a policy framework than a plan. So of course, this makes it very difficult to in any way analyze what the cumulative impacts of planned activities will be, because there's so much uncertainty about the volume and intensity of those activities. They are not part of the plan because the plan does not have that level of detail, because it's really an enabling framework rather than a strategic guidance document. As a consequence of this, there is a real risk that it's becoming a development-led system. There's a risk that at sea we will repeat the mistakes that have been made in planning on land. And it's a real shame to have to put it in those words. I mean, you know, you would expect that Ireland would have learned from the legacy of poor planning on land, where there's very clearly been a development-led system, to adopt a plan-led approach at sea. But I see very little evidence of this. Even with the offshore renewable development plan, it's stated very clearly that this is a stakeholder-led process. Stakeholder in practice really means developer-led. It's the key stakeholders are the companies who are building wind farms. So what is missing in the National Marine Planning Framework? There's a lack of strategic direction, as mentioned already, a lack of guidance on where activities should take place, a lack of information on the location of valuable and vulnerable ecosystems. This is a really important aspect as well. And this assessment of the cumulative impact of human activities at sea is largely missing. So this is really a case of putting the cart before the horse. What we do not have so far is the designation of a network of marine protected areas. This is a commitment under the programme for government. It's an international commitment as well to designate 30% of Ireland's marine space, which is a very, very large area, as protected areas by 2030. But this has not happened so far. And there's no indication within the National Marine Planning Framework of where these areas might be. Where is the nature that we want to protect at sea? Where is the nature that we need to protect? There is not sufficient guidance on this. So this is a real problem as an enabling framework, enabling development activity at sea without these safeguards in place. So yeah, what is happening now? How do we move on from here? I think a really important element of this conversation is the need to move towards regional level marine spatial plans. So this would be, the technical term here is DMAPs, designated maritime area plans, which can be prepared under the legislation that has been introduced at the end of last year. So what is necessary is a robust hierarchy of national, regional and local plans. The Act allows for regional marine plans, but critically does not require their preparation. And if anyone is familiar with really anyone familiar with the Irish planning system knows that this is not the way to go, that if something is not required, then it is much less likely to happen. So I've prepared this map before just to give an indication of what regional boundaries might look like at sea in the Irish context. And really, this is just the idea is to have this as a starting point for a conversation. And one potential way forward here would be to extend the regional assembly boundaries on land out to sea, and to have areas then where there is input from the local authorities, coastal authorities, and also the regional assemblies, and then further out onto central government jurisdiction. I think this sort of combined approach would be necessary, and this would of course then imply creating a marine spatial plan for the Irish Sea specifically as well. Again, this is something that is possible under the current legislation, but as far as I know, there are no official plans as yet, at least, for this type of approach. So if we look at an Irish Sea perspective, what would this require? On the map here that was produced by O'Higgins et al. In 2019, here you can see an indication of current activities within the Irish Sea. So this is a transboundary space, of course, and we can see that, you know, we are not only dealing with offshore wind here. That's one issue among others. Fishing, of course, is a key issue, also shipping, and a range of other issues as well that really need to be dealt with from a spatial integrated perspective, and also from an ecosystem-based perspective. So an Irish Sea perspective in marine spatial planning would be transboundary, would require very close cooperation and coordination with the relevant agencies and authorities in Wales, England, Scotland, also the Isle of Man as well. It is also very much of necessity cross-sectoral, and really must bring the different sectors together, however difficult that may be. And marine protection really must be a critical focus here as well, with a robust network of protected areas and a strong ecosystem-based approach. I really think we need to move to this regional scale to make marine spatial planning more concrete, moving away from a policy framework at the national level, or only having a policy framework at the national level, to developing regional and local plans as well, similar to we have on land. So we can also look at a Dublin Bay perspective. This map here is from the Dublin Bay Biosphere Reserve, this idea, and I think it's helpful to have this more creative, maybe playful approach to indicating how Dublin Bay is used, and also the coast is used by different groups in different ways. That can be a very helpful part of the conversation. So complementing formal maps with ones that are more illustrative and tell a story in a different way, if you like. It is possible to prepare DMAPs, designated maritime area plans, for nearshore areas. I think what is provided for specifically is up to 3 nautical miles, but that there is provision to extend that as well. There is also explicit legislative provision to prepare joint DMAPs. So this will be crossing local authority boundaries, that a number of local authorities can work together from a functional region perspective. And I think this is something which really should be taken on board, and there's a lot of potential there, and it really makes a lot of sense to do that, rather than each local authority doing their own thing. So there's real potential for synergies there, and to take a more functional ecosystem-based perspective with local authorities working together. And this certainly applies to the Dublin Bay area as well. There is also potential for multi-stakeholder coastal partnerships. This is something that has been mentioned, certainly in the context of the the legislation as it was moving through the houses of Oireachtas. And there is quite a lot of good practice and experience to draw on here as well, particularly in the UK, going back over the last 10 or 15 years or so, where multi-stakeholder partnerships on the coast have been implemented and have successfully brought stakeholders together to address a number of issues. Of course, they should not replace, they're not a substitute for the formal legislative processes, but they can play a very important role as well. So that is maybe something that is of interest to Killiney Community Council also. I think it is also very important, even when we move from the national to the regional to the local level, that we also keep in mind a European or a global perspective. I think it's very important to recognize that offshore wind has an important role to play in the shift to a sustainable society and economy. It does not make sense to deny that. And in fact, Ireland's targets for offshore wind, 7 gigawatts by 2030, are relatively low in comparison, particularly considering the size of Ireland's marine space. I would argue that there's a need for a coordinated European ecosystem-based approach. There are some areas of marine territory in Europe, the North Sea and Baltic Sea, for example, that are very, very busy spaces with a very high intensity of uses, yet where there are very high ambitions for offshore wind as well, very, very high targets, which is very, very problematic in terms of the marine ecosystems. So there is a need to ensure a balance in terms of the distribution of offshore wind, and to ensure proper planning as well, that it's not necessary, for example, for 70 gigawatts of offshore wind within the German exclusive economic zone, which is the plan of the current government in Germany. And that's at a very, very different scale than is currently planned in Ireland. So that's just to give a wider perspective, which may be useful here also. I think floating turbines may give more location options, and this is something that increasingly will become, or is likely to become, economically more competitive, likely to be a realistic option in many cases. And this means that wind farms can be located further offshore. And there are a range of other issues as well. For example, whether wind farms should be accompanied by residential platforms, or whether the workers for maintenance should commute on a daily basis from the shore. And there it's really important that the right questions are asked to really see which options are better from an environmental point of view. I think that's really important. That's really all I want to say, the issues that I wanted to cover. And I thank you for your attention, first of all, and I look forward to the discussion. The evaluation document, which of course includes much more detail, it can be downloaded from the SWAN website, and you can find out more about my work at my own website here as well. So yeah, I'll leave it at that, and I look forward to the discussion. So thank you for listening.
Sorry, Cormac, can you hear me? We're having technical issues here again. Okay.
I can hear you now, yeah.
We'll go straight into questions now from our audience here. Yes,
okay.
Dave, could you?
Thank you so much. One question, please. Are you saying that actually Ireland has no spatial plan? Because it's not including. Hi, Cormac, thank you so much. Am I right in thinking that Ireland has no spatial plan at present? Does the Offshore Renewable Development Plan or the National Marine Planning Framework count? Or because we are leaving out marine protected areas, does that mean that we have no spatial plan? We're not following EU directives.
Yeah, I mean, this is a question of interpretation. I think at the moment it's looking likely that I mean, I don't think the European Commission is going to come back and say that Ireland's NMPF does not count as a marine spatial plan. I don't think that's going to happen. But from from an analytical perspective, I would say that it is not a spatial plan because it does not. There's no map to show where activity will take place. It doesn't do that. It does that to even less extent than the national planning framework on land.
And Cormac, I'm just, with relation to relevant projects, you know, say for instance, there's been 7 fast-tracked projects, marine offshore wind development. And my understanding from an EU perspective of relevant projects are things that are already there in existence, like Dublin Port, for example, and it's in the vicinity of an SAC. What is your professional thinking of the fact that these projects haven't even been built yet and they're given relevant project status?
I am not sure of the legal technicalities there, but certainly I don't think that was what was envisaged when this concept of relevant projects was introduced.
Would this be normal in Europe? Has this been done before, or is this just the Irish government twisting things for their own benefit for development and not thinking of biodiversity comes first?
Yeah. I mean, in most cases in Europe, probably not all, but in most cases, there would have been some form of planning at sea prior to the establishment of a marine spatial plan, under which such projects would have been developed. So it's from that perspective, it is unusual that this planning context is missing there. I don't have the full overview across Europe to say that this is not happening anywhere else. Practice does vary very, very significantly across Europe because the planning systems are very different also.
Okay, are there any more questions there? Just announcing.
Hi, I'm just a bit confused. The Fair Seas issued the large document with what looks to me like a spatial plan, but maybe I'm confused about that. Can you clarify? Because they have a plan mapped out with showing 30%. How does that relate to what you're talking about?
Yeah, this is correct. So the Fair Seas document, this has been issued by a group of NGOs, and they do have a proposal for a network of protected areas, if you like, and this is a step forward in what needs to be happening. This was something that came out more recently following the publication of the National Marine Planning Framework. My critique is that there is as yet no spatial plan as such at government level, and that's where it needs to come from. So the key question really here in my mind is what is a plan? What to expect from a plan? What should a plan do? And a key component of that, based on the international literature, international practice, is that the plan gives an indication or stipulates what will happen where, or what is allowed to happen where over the period of the plan. And the National Marine Planning Framework simply does not do that. The offshore renewable energy development plans don't do that either, and they are sectoral. They do not have the integrated focus, which is clearly very necessary here as well. We're not dealing with one sectoral issue.
What you were speaking about, I just wanted to ask about tidal energy and whether that's on the map, any map at all, in relation to the EU. I know there's a few projects in Wales and Scotland, and I know that the finances for some of those projects were given before Brexit, so they won't be getting any more money from the EU. But I'm just wondering if that's on the map or on the cards at all anywhere as a possible alternative to fixed wind turbines at sea.
I have not seen any studies which indicate that tidal energy could provide anything like a similar volume of energy, or that the ecosystem impacts would be less if it was implemented at that scale. That certainly would be new to me. I haven't seen any indication that would be the case. So I'm not sure what the advantage would be, if you like.
Okay. And
proceed if we are a community council trying to understand what you're saying, and how would you guide us in terms of informing the government how to behave, to be clear, to be specific, to be disciplined, and to be transparent?
Yeah, I think I missed the beginning of the question, but really you're asking how should the community council proceed, and in terms of influencing or asking the government to do things differently. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the agenda, what the priorities are of the community council, first of all. I mean, I think I should say that openly, but yeah, I mean, I think it is very important to call for proper planning and to call for an open and transparent planning process, as you mentioned, and to say that it is not good enough to only have a national framework, that we need to have detailed, concrete plans for the Dublin Bay area, for example. One way of doing that may be to try to develop a coalition of different stakeholders, a partnership that you can bring together, so that there is a bottom-up process as well. I mean, I think there is certainly potential there to do that. Possibly, I think one strategic question there is what geographical area to include you know, and whether that should happen at the Irish Sea level or more specifically for the Dublin Bay area, for example. So there are, you know, I think, some strategic questions there that really need to be discussed in your own group first, I would say.
Okay, very quick question. Who do you think can make the change over here? So could you give us names, targets? Because to talk about the government, so we know that the government is not prepared to take this, you know, action on. But for sure, you know, people out there that can make the differences on this. So who we should actually approach and, you know, try to break this up, because it's really important what we try to do here, and this government is just not helping.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a difficult question. I think it is important to try and have the dialogue at local authority level as well. I don't know if you will run against closed doors there or not. I mean, it's obviously very, very important that there isn't a perception that this is coming from a NIMBY perspective, which, you know, it's there might be that perception. So you need to find ways to ensure that that's not how it is perceived. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's important to try and have a conversation with the companies who are interested in developing wind farms as well within the Irish context. And, you know, many of them, I think, will be very much interested in having an approach which is not damaging to the marine ecosystems. I mean, it's in their interest as well, because they want to minimize the likely obstacles that could happen at a later stage in the planning process. So it's, you know, I think it's very important to keep those channels open and to see what's possible there. I mean, of course, also some of the key environmental NGOs are doing some very good work in this area as well, and so they will be strategic partners, if you like, in this context also. Does that make sense?
Another question, comment.
Thank you. On a point of information, can you tell me about the current developments of wind energy off the coast of Norway, Holland, and Scotland? I understand that mainly they are floating rather than fixed turbines. Is that true?
I don't know for sure. Yeah, certainly the share of floating turbines is increasing, but whether it is now the majority or not at this stage, I couldn't say. I think it certainly is moving in that direction. A critical issue there, of course, is to that there are concrete tests to ensure that the noise impact, for example, during the construction phase for floating turbines, that is and also during the operational phase, that is significantly lower than it would be the case with conventional turbines. I mean, that's, you know, one of the key issues that we are talking about here in relation to impacts on cetaceans, for example.
Just continuing that, the thought process is that if there are floating turbines, they can be moved further out into the Irish Sea to get over the issue that the residents and the people of Ireland legitimately have by the destruction of their environment.
I don't quite follow. It's not necessarily the case that the marine environment farther out to the sea is less valuable or less in need of protection than it is close to shore.
That's very true.
Yeah.
I guess I'm thinking about the concern of the people of Ireland in terms of the scenic beauty of their country.
Ah, okay. I would see that as a marginal issue. I mean, in most cases, you know, we are talking about wind turbines that you would be able to see on the horizon. The impacts even if they are relatively close to shore, they are not that significant. I mean, that's not I wouldn't see that as an environmental issue in that sense. That's,
Well,
something
I
different.
wonder, is that true? I mean, the drawings we have seen of the General Electric turbines are up to 1,000 feet tall. That is 300 meters.
Okay, yeah. Okay, they would be very high ones, certainly, yeah. And how far offshore are they planned for?
197 meters at 6 kilometers.
6 kilometers offshore. Valerie, I pass it to Valerie. Valerie.
Okay.
Very high, actually, Cormac. There
Yeah,
are,
yeah.
you know, at 10 kilometers, we have up to 310 meters, at 13 kilometers, up to 120 meters, and at 6 kilometers from shore, 197 meters. Very, very tall, very much out of line with what's happening anywhere in Europe, where many of these wind farms that are close to the shore have turbines that are half that height or less. Yes, so we're looking at a very different scale here and size. But in one way,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
really
yeah.
agree with you. I don't think we should be focusing on the visual, because that's not really the issue. The issue is the biodiversity impacts. And the biodiversity impacts on the very particular habitats that we have off the East Coast are actually very significant, because they are habitats listed for protection in the Habitats Directive. And the Habitats and Birds Directives are obviously two of the other directives that are important in this whole protection of the environment.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say that the visual aspects should be neglected completely. And certainly there are, it is possible to conduct studies which measure very accurately what the impact will be of a certain height at a certain distance from certain locations, and it is necessary to do those studies as well. And there should be certainly discussions on height restrictions, also from the perspective of birds and bats as well. That it may also be relevant. Certainly, the higher the wind turbines are, they will impact birds. If there are flight paths of birds in those areas, the impact will be much more significant than if they are if the turbines are lower. So these issues definitely do need to be considered very seriously, and the visual impact should be included in any environmental impact assessment as well.
This brings me back to the relevant projects, because the relevant projects, the Marine Spatial Plan Directive, which isn't actually proper, as you said that it's not necessary to include the relevant projects in environmental assessment. These leases were granted over 20 years ago, very much developer-led, no ecosystem approach, and there's been no strategic environmental assessment of these areas. And the government now want to push it through without proper environmental assessment and exclude it from ever getting strategic environmental assessment. I am seriously worried about this. I think it's detrimental to biodiversity. I don't understand how this could happen. What's your professional opinion?
Yeah, I mean, that definitely is a a serious problem. And really, I think the response here should be, there really needs to be designated maritime area plans produced for these areas. And that then would require strategic environmental assessment. Yeah, I mean, I understand from a legislative point of view that if the leases date back far enough, then technically SEA is not required. But that is, it's very difficult to understand how anybody would stand behind that and say, yeah, the environmental impacts are not relevant here. I mean, that's not the way to do things.
Well, I think maybe we'll finish now with the format. Thank you so much. That was an extremely interesting discussion. You have really highlighted a lot of areas that I don't think people realize are so serious. So thank you so much for your contribution. And thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, good luck with the rest of your meeting.
So, yeah, I'm a member of Coastal Concern Alliance. We have been campaigning really to get all plans done properly, I suppose, since 2006. We started off realising that the Foreshore Act 1933 was the legislation that was governing all of the planning at sea. And, it was pretty obvious that it was outdated. In fact, pre-millennium, there was mutterings about changing it, and indeed it was in one of the government plans pre-millennium that they would actually revise the plan, but it didn't happen. 2006 we started to work to do that. So what I'm going to just talk about here is two of the plans that have kind of passed through our books really over the last 15, 16 years. And they've already been mentioned, some of them by Cormac's presentation. So we've also talked about strategic environmental assessment. I just want to try to use the full word and not talk about SEA, but that's really the only environmental assessment I'm going to talk about, SEA. So if I fall into that lingo, sorry. So the first one is harnessing our ocean wealth. Now this is important because it was on this plan that it's on this plan that actually the National Marine Planning Framework was based. And what happened with this plan was that there was no strategic environmental assessment, there was actually no public consultation, and it wasn't even passed through the Dáil, so there was no Dáil debate. What happened instead was that on the 2nd of February 2012, the plan was launched. There was quite a big hoo-ha to launch it. And it was actually a precursor to the plan itself. It was towards a marine plan. It included 10 questions that people could respond to, but there was no open public communication consultation. In March, the plan was presented by the Minister to a joint committee, and they approved the plan, so to speak. They wrote a 3-page report saying these things that are on the slide. They welcomed the new initiative and they approved the approach. And then in July, harnessing our offshore wind and integrated marine plan for Ireland was accepted, published. And so that is the plan, which had no strategic environmental assessment. Somebody in the audience was asking about strategic environmental assessment of relevant projects. I'm going to come to that in a minute, but it's the same thing. It was just left out. It didn't happen. Okay, the next plan that I'm going to talk about has also been mentioned, the Offshore Renewable Energy Development Plan. Now, this was happening at about the same time as harnessing our ocean wealth, and it did have a strategic environmental assessment. It was done by a company called AECOM, and before the process began, there was quite a lot of discussion about how all this was going to work. And there were some projects that had already begun to stick their pins in the map and say, I'd like to build on that bit. But that's exactly how it happened. They could just stick a pin wherever they wanted. In fact, they still can. So in order to deal with those plans, the minister at the time gave a parliamentary statement, and he said, no, go back to the other one, please. He said, the strategic environmental assessment shouldn't influence or affect the processing of existing foreshore lease applications. So before the people who were doing this assessment started, they were told not to include any of these things. They did that. They did what the minister told them by actually including the next one. Thanks. So they included these statements and others in the environmental report. They said 2 projects have already received a foreshore lease, and we're a bit short of time, but maybe I'll just tell you very quickly about those. That was Arklow Bank, on the Arklow Bank, and that was a very strange manner that lease was given. And then on the Codling Bank, a lease was given in 2005. That at the time was the biggest offshore wind farm in the world. There wasn't one single submission from any member of the public because nobody knew it was going on. And 3 wind projects that were due to receive a grid connection offer under the gate process. That was 5 developments, and what AECOM said in their environmental report was these projects have been shown in the strategic environmental assessment as already existing renewable infrastructure. So since 2010, a bunch of developments that had gone through no strategic environmental assessment have actually been seen by the government and continue to be seen by the government as already existing renewable infrastructure. Okay. So which projects were these? I've told you 2 of them. There was also Oriel up in Dundalk Bay, the Kishenbray Bank, surprise. Codling Bank 1 was included in the offshore renewable energy development plan because that site is broken into 2 and they hadn't got any permission on the second half. Then Arklow Bank and Skerda Rocks was a smaller development in the middle of Galway Bay, but 5 kilometres from the shore in the middle of Galway Bay. So So what's happened to those is that really they have just been allowed, having had no strategic environmental assessment, to continue to make plans and process and apply for licenses, and we have all objected and said they're not fit for purpose, and they're not. Many of them haven't complied with the Habitats Directive, for example, or the Birds Directive, but this has all been allowed to go on. So in 2020 then, we got this new maritime area planning bill, which was adopted on the 23rd of December 2021. And in that bill, before that bill was drafted, behind closed doors, the government drafted a transition protocol, and this was the instrument used to designate particular projects as relevant projects, again, that Cormac talked about. There is a specific definition for what a relevant project is. Again, it's already been said, something like a port that's already there that you can't do anything about. You have to put your plan around it. But clearly that doesn't apply to developments that we can clearly see do not exist. So if you go on to 2020, so in 2020, as a result of this transition protocol that was actually designed behind closed doors, no environmental assessment of any kind, no public consultation, not even a whisper of it in the public domain. Now, we were in COVID at this time. A number of wind farms were given this relevant project status. Oriel in Dundalk Bay, the Kishenbray Banks, Codling Bank, but they put the 2 of them in this time now, even though they don't have any current assessment really of the second site, Codling 2, and North Irish Sea Array, which when they were designating these relevant projects didn't even have any ever foreshore license or lease, obviously, and then the Skerda Rocks. So what happened was in 2010, all these projects were just skipped over. The minister said they were just to be treated as if they existed, and that's actually what has continued. We still have them all there as relevant projects. And now the transition protocol allows the minister, just happens to be Eamon Ryan, to grant to these projects what is called the maritime area consent. Without any further ado, they can go ahead and apply for planning permission when the new strategic infrastructure system is set up with on board Canola. Okay, the next one. So, I mean, I think you're getting a general overview of the situation, and the same thing obviously applies to these particular plans and the transition protocol as applied to the National Marine Planning Framework. It's not fit for purpose. So again, this is very much what Cormac was saying, you know, it is critically flawed, but there is this absolute determination by government to continue to go ahead. Again, exactly like Cormac said, I mean, we have to ask and, you know, insist that they review and amend the National Marine Planning Framework. I think the designation of MPAs is so urgent, and it is part of this whole marine spatial planning process. And I believe that we should begin to ask for the withdrawal of this fast track system for all of these plans that have never been subjected to SEA. So thank you for that. I know there's a huge amount of information in all of this, but hopefully you're getting a bit of a sense of the situation.
Thank you, Valerie, for that overview, and you certainly have described what a mess we have found ourselves in as far as these designated projects are. I wonder, are there any questions for Valerie?
Yes. Are there other groups similar to ourselves here around the country who
Yeah.
are doing this? Because this
Yes.
is a disaster. And it
Yeah.
needs a huge.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really good question, actually, and I did think of it earlier. Thanks, Michael. Yes, I mean, we are a national group. I mean, we have, you know, made submissions on the Skirt of Rock in Galway Bay, on all of the Boreal throughout the years. Now, we are also a small group, and we are, you know, really struggling to manage because it is a huge issue. There are groups in Wicklow. I mean, some of them are here. There are groups in Waterford. They're online, I hope, hearing us. And there are groups up in Oriel in Dundalk Bay. But like this group, you know, everybody needs to learn about this. People don't know what's going on. So, and people, just imagine starting this. Like, I've been trying to learn about this. I knew nothing in the beginning for the last 16 years. I can, you know, remember and get my head around a little bit of it now. But it's a huge issue. And it's so complicated because all of these plans are interlinked and dovetailed, and there is this absolute determination that this should plough ahead, even though none of these plans are actually fit for purpose. And obviously neither was the Foreshore Act. But effectively, I kind of think about this as, you know, it's like the old lady who swallowed the fly. You know, the Foreshore Act was the first fly, and every single plan, you know, that's kind of been thrown at this to sort of deal with the fly just honestly makes things worse, because the whole objective is to not reform, really.
Where are the developers at in terms of their, where are the developers at in terms of their plans for these various arrays?
What do you mean exactly by that?
Are they,
Everybody got planning permission? Have they applied for planning permission?
and where do they see themselves? Do they see themselves starting work shortly,
You
or
know,
what?
You know that two have just pulled out over the last while, and one of them was, yeah. I think that, I mean, this is not good for them either. Let's be really clear. I mean, this doesn't serve anybody well. I mean, a number of these licenses out here are subject to judicial review because that was the only instrument that was available to challenge this mess. So I don't think it serves them well. I think they are hoping that their very cosy relationship with government, that the government will somehow find a way to make it work. That's what I really believe. But I don't think it's a very comfortable situation. I mean, I laughed, you know, at that piece in the paper yesterday, which said that Paul Kelly, who is working for this company that we want to develop out here, was looking for a bit of flexibility. I mean, you must be joking. I mean, that site out there started with somebody sticking a pin in the map and then drawing a little line about it, and it was 4,000 hectares. That was the site, right? As that was in about 2000 or maybe 2001. And that site now, nobody has had any input into this, is about 110,000 hectares. About 110,000. And all of the others have done the same thing. So nobody has any oversight. The site selection has no oversight on site selection, the most important way to actually prevent environmental damage. No site selection oversight. Not today, not tomorrow.
I'm still not clear on where they think they are at this
Oh,
stage.
well, I can't speak for them, Brian, but I mean, they keep doing things. I mean, again, in that article, I mean, I read it like in the last couple of days, like you did, I presume. You know, I mean, they said, oh, they've been doing all these bird surveys. Yeah, yes, you know. Yeah, well, we know that there's loads of birds out on this bank here. I mean, I could tell you another story. I mean, this bank was selected for designation in 2012, just the same time as all these plans were cooking. And at the last minute, it was removed from the designation.
I spoke to a developer last night, and he said that what you're looking at out there is old capital at this stage, and that all the developments they're doing of Norway, Holland, and Scotland, all on platforms. You know, what they're looking for from people is they're looking for proposals from us, rather than us rejecting what they're proposing. That's sort of the way they see it.
But you are right, it is old hat, it's 20 years old. These are a quarter of a century old.
Yes.
You're totally right, the technology is outdated. You know, the site selection is a disaster here. You know,
And to be honest, I think Fair Seas have done their homework really well.
They really
They have
have.
identified where we shouldn't build, where there shouldn't be industrial wind farms. And we're not just talking about wind farms, we're talking about everything. Like, these are areas that should be protected. The sea is our largest carbon sink, and we're on a continental shelf, which means it's full of life. And there's certain areas that should be no-take zones. And the science has to be followed. But as Valerie has said, it wasn't an ecosystem approach, it was development-led. It was development-led years ago. We can't go ignorant into the future. We know the science now. The government can't say that they didn't know. They do know.
No, I think
A small comment is, the committee, the national committee is now looking at biodiversity. That's the next topic, as you know. This is
oh,
a-
the citizen science.
Yes.
Yeah, the
That's a
citizens
that's
assembly.
pretty important analysis being done at the moment. And are those people looking at the proposal we're talking about here, which will destroy so much of biodiversity? So we would work out contacting those people and telling them where our concerns are.
Of course, and in fairness, they are well aware of this. I mean, Pádraig Fogarty from the Irish Wildlife Trust, who's linked to Fair Seas, was in talking to them yesterday, or the day before maybe. Karen Dubsky was in there, who runs Coast Watch. Yes, the environmental groups that have been jumping up and down about this for, you know, many years. But I think they even are, you know, more aware now. I think in fact, you know, I think Coastal Concern Alliance should take bow. We've been at this for much longer, and we've seen what's happened over the years. Now the environmental NGOs, because of the legislation that's coming through, have become much more aware and see the flaws, because as soon as you look at it, you can see the flaws.
Okay, are there any further questions? Gentleman at the back there? Oh, sorry, you have them. Can we just take the man here? He's got the microphone, and then we'll take the microphone down too.
Yeah. Well, I'm from this locality. I was a press glass tool boy, and then I ended up as a chemical engineer and regulatory specialist. And I spent between 1999 and 2017 a huge amount of time out in Eastern Europe bringing in all this environmental legislation there on behalf of the European Commission. So around 2008, 2009, I got very concerned about the the wind energy program that was going on here. And this conversation that we're having here tonight has been replicated all around Europe at this moment in time. The countryside has been trashed, the seas are being trashed, and it's mad developer-led process. So I won a court case at the UN against the European Union in that we never went through the strategic environmental assessments here. That was in the High Court for 3.5 years, and the High Court decided it didn't have to decide and wouldn't refer it to Europe. But we have now, more pressure was put internationally on the European Union to meet its commitments to the Aarhus Convention in the UN in Geneva. The Council of State had to overrule the European Commission and provide access to the courts to NGOs, and that started from October this year. So we now have a case running at the Court of Justice on the National Energy and Climate Plans to pull them all down, because it's part of the Aarhus Convention has ruled that not only did they fail to do the necessary plan and programme environmental assessments back in 2009 on the National Renewable Energy Action Plans for 2010 to 2020, despite them going into compliance proceedings at the UN on a regular basis, they refused to answer written questions, and they did the same thing again for these National Energy and Climate Plans running from 2021 to 2030. So now the legal mechanism is available to us, and we're taking advantage of it and using it to stop these. We've also, in Belgium, they have won significant cases that you can't approve a project if the strategic environmental assessment should have been done on the overarching plans and programs. That registers the wind farm as illegal, the same way as you have the situation in Derry Breen, where the wind farm was left as illegal and was left in legal limbo there. So bit by bit, we're kind of pushing in and chipping away at this, but it's been a long haul, and you have no idea of the amount of illegal behaviour, contempt for law, contempt for people's right, so that the European Union and its officials go through on a daily basis. And I mean, I think they've learned it from the Irish state.
Thank you. The gentleman at the back there. Oh, there's somebody at the back.
I just wanted to thank you for your work and for reading all this stuff. I can just say, would it be possible that your information slides would be available to us?
Yes, of course. We also
To understand the history of any of these,
Yes.
situations is extremely important. I was totally unaware of any of this, so I
Yeah.
would like to, see it clearly, like almost a history of.
Yeah, in fairness, the slides tonight are like minute, like we do have a website, we don't have resources, we are completely independent, we take money from nobody. So we don't have any fancy websites, that kind of thing, but we do have a website that has a huge amount of information at www.coastalconcern.ie. I do have some business cards, actually, I did bring them, so if you're interested, I can give you, and we have Twitter at Coastal Concern, and so, we have a little bit of a media presence or a presence that you can go and look up stuff, but you can also contact us, we have an email.
Okay, I think it's that.
May I just raise, can you hear me? Yeah. Landfall cables, 2 companies want landfall cables coming in the middle of Killiney Bay near the river estuaries. Codling, I never had time to go through the hundreds of pages of that. I wasn't around at the time. But Dublin Array are one of them. Now, under the seabed, in the case of Dublin Array, through the crumbling cliff right beside the wastewater treatment plant, 5 boreholes, survey boreholes, were drilled to a depth of 20-25 metres in the last 2 weeks. They seem to have a site where the railway line is flat. It's a public amenity area and allotments, where you could possibly get the cable under the railway line. And I was thinking, oh, well, that would be negotiated. And then there's a river, the Shanganagh River. So how are they going to get over the river? So I was sort of thinking maybe they'll go more Shank Hill. I have to say I live in Bayview in South Killiney, and we're only ordinary houses, and there's huge council housing area, and they have their own sports fields. It took years to get up and running. But it seems on the big red circles on the map, I only managed to download this week after spending years asking Cable Links Shangana, question, 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 this map pops up, red circles, I've shared it with a few people. They could be bending this particular cable link back through our area. They could be bending it way over, cutting through up towards Military Road somewhere. I mean, you practically need a magnifying glass. They're notional ideas, it's a survey, but that's where it's at. And they're becoming, the other company would like to come under the seabed somewhere near that old Martello Tower and possibly have a substation on the beach, public right of way, and of course the biodiversity. I'm with Coastwatch. You know, we've otters coming up the river, birds, dead birds at the moment. There would be other species and biota, of course. Bats too, you know.
So who is behind this?
Well, this is a Dublin Array, or RWE Renewables now. TD sent me a very useful drone picture of the 5 sites. A councillor had shared a notice they got. Why is the public not getting this information? I say to passers-by, did you notice these? Oh yes, they're drilling for oil. Did you notice? I did see something. They'd have planning permission. I said, no, they don't. They're foreshore licenses. There's a certain allowance for surveying, but, you know, and I know major sewage outfall, wastewater treatment plant, river, and they want to put the cables really, I know engineers said they can do it, but they're in a very tight area of about 700 metres. The subsurface of the cliff is riddled with the major sewers coming from Bray. And the manager of one of the engineers in the site, the wastewater plant, said to me a couple of years ago, I said, have you noticed the survey ship's 150 metres out one day? No. And then I say, have you heard about the possibility of cable links? Silence. What's going to happen to my sewers? This is Irish water. So it's the joined up thinking worries me. There's also extra drainage from the M50 drainage that, you know, we're a flood area. Is it good to run cables through a flood area? I don't know. I'm not an engineer. I asked the questions. I've asked these people. I don't think they read half the submissions anyway. Yeah, just I thought I'd better say it because this is one of the issues. Also Poolbeg, but it will be an issue in other areas too.
Yeah, it's similar kind of.
Yes, and other
situation will
companies.
happen in other areas.
Yeah.
And at the moment, the public are not really aware of it.
No,
They need proof.
they're not being told. Sure.
Yeah, thank you for that. There's a gentleman near you, yeah.
Hi, I just wanted to say that in the next couple of days, there's an installation being put by us near Poolbeg Yacht Club, and it'll have very big posters demanding 30% marine protected areas for Ireland. So we're also planning to put an information centre on the other side of it. So I just want to invite anybody here. Louis Heath, and we're part of Ocean Rebellion and Scientist Rebellion. So, okay.
Okay, well, thank you for that, and maybe you get in contact with us so we can work together. I think the message that we got from Cormac was that we have to start working together. Local communities now have to start joining together and making ourselves heard. Okay, I'll just take one more question because I think we're running over time again.
Thank you. There's a few of us here have come up from the Southeast Coastal Protection Alliance, and we have a main interest in the Arklow Bank wind farm, and it's might be constructed on a sandbank. Now, what we're concerned about is the impact. Is not so much on the sandbank itself, but the impact that it will have on the beaches. Now, Brighouse Bay, Buckrony is an SAC, and it seems to be that there is a genuine effort by the developers to ignore the impact on the coast. And we have seen a number of evidences of that, and not least the existing 7 that are sitting on the sandbank at the moment. And we have asked SSE Renewables the question, what impact, have you done any assessment of the impact that those 7 turbines have had on the beaches? Now, they have replied and said, well, in actual fact, there's already an EIR done for that, and it's really outside of our jurisdiction. So they're not looking at the impact of the beaches. Now, the beaches are the SAC, and that's an environmental conservation area. So how can they say that construction of wind farms on the sandbank will not impact on a European conservation site?
Yes, it's all issues like this that we have to be aware of, have to collate together, I think, and join together.
Sorry, that was just me actually. Sorry, I'd just like to thank Dalkey Community Council and Killiney Community Council for organising this, because I know how difficult it is to sort of delve into something which is so complicated. But the communities don't know what's happening. And I think it's really up to locals to get together, find out what's happening off their shores and protect their biodiversity. Because to be honest, having listened to what's going on, if we don't do it, nobody is going to do it. So I'd just like to say thank you to Dalkey and to Killiney.
Thank you all for coming tonight. I think we probably will have future meetings, but we'll have to just kind of draw breath and see where we're going from here. But obviously, this is a huge issue that is not going away and that we have to tackle it. And it is up to us to do something about it. So thank you for all coming and good night.